Hi lovelies and welcome to the Witch's Cookery. Today we're talking Wicca, Witchcraft and Paganism. What's the difference? What did the historic terms mean? What do we mean when we talk about it in a modern day context? And of course we're also gonna clean up with some misconception and misinformation that is out there. Now a lot of beginner witches are very confused. Are all witches Wiccan? Are witches even pagan? What is the difference? And how can you tell what you are or what to follow? Of course, how a practitioner in fact in their daily life practices their witchcraft, Wicca or paganism varies widely from person to person. But if you want to have a little bit more of an idea of active practitioners, I did an interview with two other lovely magical YouTube ladies, Ella Harrison and Scarlett Ravenwoods, and we had a long chat about how our own personal practice looks like. And I posted an interview a while ago. If you have some time, treat it like a podcast, fold some laundry or clean your house while you're listening in. So let's deep dive right into what I personally practice, which is witchcraft. Witchcraft, as is already in the name, is a craft, a practice, something that you do. It doesn't necessarily describe a belief system, it's not a religion. It basically means multiple skills, practices or interests under one hat. A pointy one, if you will. And how those skills, interests or practices look like will vary from person to person, as witchcraft is an umbrella term for all types of folk beliefs, folk traditions, practices from all over the world. There is no one way to practice witchcraft. A lot of the things that you see flying around the magical corners of the internet are derived from folk superstitions and a modern interpretation of those. For example, the historical finds of witch bottles on properties has led to what we now know as spell jars. What a German nun Hildegard von Bingen wrote down about healing crystals and how to incorporate them in her medicinal practice, we now know as crystal witchcraft, or use in our daily lives for our magical practice to call in certain energies. It's folk traditions such as placing your broom behind a door or strewing salt over your stoops, lighting a black candle during stormy nights and all that jazz. Things that people did and that got taken and newly interpreted for our modern life and our needs. So what you understand as witchcraft depends completely on your cultural context, on your knowledge background, on the continent you grew up at, the traditions that you got passed down, and probably also a general level of historic knowledge and culture. And the scale here really goes in all directions, from a bit of tarot reading for self-reflection to full-blown animal sacrifices. Every practitioner is different, every culture is different. So what do most Western modern day witches understand under the term witchcraft? It's mostly a very nature-focused practice involving lunar cycles, for some involving astronomical constellations, celebrating the seasons, self-reflection, self-development, helping your life along with some sort of rituals, spell work, mindfulness, intentional living, studies of occultism that have passed down from the Renaissance era. Again, it's really quite diverse and very personal who one person practices. I linked you a video up above about different types of witches that might shed some more information and light on an entire topic. In itself, witchcraft doesn't have any religious connotations, affiliations. It's completely secular, meaning free of religion. It's worldly. So you can just incorporate it into your life regardless of your personal beliefs or non-beliefs in religion. Of course, there are also religions or some sort of belief systems that do incorporate witchcraft or witchcraft practices. Santeria, Hoodoo, Wicca, Catholicism, they all dabble in the metaphysical, trying to evoke things, change things, banish things. I did talk more about these in my beginner witchcraft videos that I will link you up here and down below in case you're a new witch wanting to learn more about your magical abilities and the craft. Now, how we use the term witchcraft in modern day is nothing what witchcraft described back in the days. Essentially, I'm talking anything before the 19th century. If you look at the etymology of the word witchcraft, it comes probably from the Old English Wicca, which means magician or sorceress, or the Low German term Wiccan, meaning to witch, to hex, to influence. Witchcraft back in the days was a evil thing, a bad thing, and no one in their right mind would have called themselves a witch, just because in the understanding of the world it didn't mean anything positive. Witchcraft was the reason behind big storms that would destroy the harvest, or when your cow got sick, when you had the shits or the smallpox or whatever. And as we know, in many countries in Europe we had the witch hunts, the witch trials, and for some reason, and I do blame fictional books and TV, people always assume that people that were hunted or titled as witches were some wise herbal women. Not true. Not in the slightest. If you read the historic documents, there were, for example, pub owners that got accused by the other pub owner because they sold more beer. Witch! It's all doing the dirty with the devil on that mountain, riding her broom. Naggy wives accused by their husbands because they made a noodle go limp. Witchcraft! There were business rivals, love rivals, people that were a little bit odd, that were outcasts of society. Not because they were wise or they knew how to do stuff with herbs, just because people now had an easy way to get rid of people they didn't like. It's also not true that it was only women that were prosecuted. There were definitely men too that were titled witches, there were children, and it also went through all levels of society. By the way, on the topic of the witchy herbalist midwife, most of the correspondences that we now in Western society know for our magic uses, the sympathetic magic as it's titled, most of the knowledge about crystal was actually derived from written documents from nuns and monks in cloisters, not so much from the village hag. Even though of course people also knew how to use the things that grew around them, because that's literally how they survived and treated stuff. Of course, different countries will have a different history with witchcraft, and for example the Salem witch trials had a very different socio-economic reasoning behind it. People would actually refer to themselves as a witch. If you want to know more about that, if you want to see a video where I really deep dive into that history, let me know. Unfortunately, we still see it in a lot of developing countries or countries that are still very rural, foster that environment for superstitions and for that sort of belief. For example, kids that are born with some sort of physical handicap are often titled witches, and they're just cast out at like infancy, and they have to fend in the streets for themselves and are like looked down on by the entire village because people fear them as witches. So I never quite understood why people would bring modern day witchcraft even in relation with the old witches, historic witches, because in the end these people didn't witchcraft, they didn't call themselves witches. Might even go so far to call it a tiny bit disrespectful to the ones that were tortured and killed. But it's just my own opinion though, yeah. You do what you want. So when did the term witchcraft shift from a negative to positive? Well, it was mainly during the Renaissance, when the rich and the famous dabbled in occultism, dabbled in alchemy, were interested in numerology and how the universe worked in a metaphysical sense, in a way they couldn't really explain, but they tried to make sense of it. They wanted to increase their own power. In some ways it was also self-development, and by then any types of rituals, invocations became very in. But then only really with the rise in popularity of Wicca, witchcraft also became its modern day meaning. If you're from a country with a rich old history, you will still see it in the older generations that they do practice some folk beliefs, some folk traditions that a modern day witch would title witchcraft, but they don't title it themselves that. It's just what people always have done. It leads us straight into our next talking point. What is Wicca? Wicca is a religion that revolves around nature worship. Wicca is a religion that revolves around nature worship. Wicca is a Attention kids! My Latin teacher in high school always used to do that. Kinder, attention! Anyway, Wicca is a religion that evolves around nature worship. Wicca is a religion. Oh god, now we lost it completely. Wicca is a religion that revolves around nature worship and the idea of a divine feminine and masculine god, goddess, and a duality in nature. And it's actually a recognized religion in many countries such as Canada, the United States and England. So where did it all start? At the beginning of the 20th century there was actually a revival and a great interest in old religions, in witchcraft, in folk practices, in the occult, and many cultural anthropologists played back and forth the idea of witch cults in Europe. So they did believe that there were some secret societies of witches, of covens. Very interesting topic, won't go too deep into it because it's also proven false. It was not the case. But there was a English dude named Gerald Gardner and he thought, wow, that sounds interesting. Hereditary witches that can do all the magic. Fancy that. In 1939 he got himself initiated into a coven, a New Forest coven. If that is correct, we are not quite sure. There is some speculation about if that was only his imagination or something that he made up, or if that really happened, because he didn't really give much information on it, but he said it's to protect their privacy. Anyways, he then said that this coven taught him a lot of ancient knowledge, and then he kind of muddled it a little bit with ideas from Buddhism, Hinduism, the old European religions, and mixed it into his own flavor of belief. For example, the 8 Sabbats, the Wiccan Sabbats, are derived from actual rural festivities that took place all over Europe under different names. He chose, of course, the island Celtic descriptors or similar to that. He wrote a Coven's Book of Shadows. He also tried to make a go with the Wiccan laws that he said were passed down from ancient wisdom, but people were like, no, you made it up, dude. This we won't buy. Probably went down a little bit like Moses on that hill with his 10 testaments. But anyway, he basically founded his own religion. Other people became interested in it and gave it their own spin. So his original idea is now referred to as Gardnerian Wicca, and you also have Alexandrian Wicca from another English dude, Alexander's. You have the more feministic approach, Dianic Wicca, and so on and so forth. But then, of course, with so many cooks stirring the pot, there is a ton of flavors and a ton of opinions. Some say you have to be initiated into Wicca, some say you can initiate yourself, say you have to practice in a coven, others say you can also practice solitary. There's some sort of debate on how long you actually have to learn in order to call yourself a Wiccan, or what the hierarchy might look like. But one thing that most Wiccans will actually consent on is their moral conduct, which is do as you want and harm none, something to that extent. My phone just died, so I can't look it up. Very short, very simple, very self-explanatory. Do the f you want, just don't hurt anyone in the process. Physically, mentally, spiritual, you know. There's also the rule of 3, kind of playing on the idea of karma. Everything you do will come back to you in threefold. So of course, if you're doing something bad, that will also have a hefty backlash. These two concepts often get muddled in with witchcraft, especially if you look into Facebook groups. There are often heated arguments about that you should not hex, that you should not harm, that you should not do this and that. That is a Wiccan concept that has nothing really to do with witchcraft, because witchcraft in itself doesn't follow a moral scheme. It's not a faith, a belief system. It's just a craft, so you can use it however the f you want. So that is just a call that a practitioner then has to make for themselves. Unless you're Wiccan, then you should stick to it, I guess. Now, as I said, in Wicca you have a divine masculine and a divine feminine as opposing forces in nature, sometimes referred to as the horned god and the moon goddess, but there isn't any set pantheon. So people or Wiccans might actually draw from different pantheons and just use a representation of some sort of god or goddess for their own craft. Again, this point does lead to a lot of confusions, especially since in a lot of books Wicca and witchcraft are used interchangeably without making that actual differentiation. So a lot of beginner witches also feel they have to work with deities, or that deity worship is a part of witchcraft, which it's actually not. It's a part of paganism or a part of Wicca. Now in the more recent decades, Wicca seems to have watered down a little bit more. They're more solitary, self-initiated practitioners that maybe even practice more the witchcraft side of things and not as much a strict Wiccan path or tradition. So what does Wicca have to do with witchcraft? Well, of course, that's the entire idea that it was based on, of a witch coven. Its tools, rituals are designed in some sort of magic context to change energy, to shift energy. And it's also based on those folk beliefs and traditions that we can actually title folk witchcraft. As with every religious organization, there are also some less sexy sides to the coin. A lot of very interesting tidbits about the history. If you want to know all about the good, bad and ugly of Wicca, let me know. I might make a video in the future. So what is paganism? I mean, I would really like to tell you, but as I said, my phone died and I have to wait until it's charged to get to my notes. But anyway, how's your coffee today? How's your day going? I hope you're doing good. Let me know in the comments. Where does the word paganism even come from? Well, it comes from paganus, Latin for villager, of the country, rural, rustic, in the broadest sense of the word. And people back in the days, of course, didn't describe themselves as pagans. They just followed their old religion, the religion of their land. But that term was developed or used by the early 4th century Christians to denote everyone that practiced a religion outside Christianity. Of course, with the growth of Christianity and Christianity becoming the only accepted or right religion in Europe and enforced by the people in charge, people that still clung to old traditions, rituals, beliefs were described as pagans or heathens. And of course, it was not meant as a very nice term, because back then you could actually get prosecuted for that. The reason for that is not necessarily that you followed the wrong gods, even though that was the excuse, but it was more that Christianity was of course also used as a tool by the people in charge, by the rulers, by the kings, by the dukes, by the whoever, the church, to keep people in line, to keep their faith in line, to have some sort of moral upper hand or a guide to suppress them with. So if you didn't prescribe to Christianity, you were in some ways also rebelling against the government. So to summarize, paganism in the traditional use of the word would mean all religions outside Christianity of the classical world, meaning ancient Greece, Rome, the Celtic, Germanic and Slavic tribes. However, with modern day paganism, that term of paganism has widened out a little bit. Now people also use it to describe religions or belief that goes way further back into the BC years, and might even use it to describe any type of native, indigenous religion, basically of tribes and nations all over the world. Now, pagan religions obviously stem from the people that didn't have the comforts of modern day world. They worked in the fields, they had to survive on what nature provided for them. They were of course somewhat more in tune and observant with nature and with what's happening in nature, because this is how they assured their survival. When to plant their plants, when to harvest the crops, and so on and so forth. It's not surprising that in a lot of those pagan religions, nature does play a big role. Most of them are polytheistic, meaning they have different gods and goddesses that all have some sort of function, a lot of them revolving obviously around agriculture, harvest, fertility, but also phenomenons in weather or in just the general natural world. The moon, storms, thunder, the water, the ocean. A lot of pagan religions observed lunar festivals. I spoke about the 8 Sabbaths before, which were celebrated in Europe in all the countries under different names obviously, but around the same time of year with a similar symbolism. And I do make vlogs for everyone in case you're interested to learn a little bit more about the history of them. Now, modern day paganism or Neo-Paganism does look a little bit different. Of course, you have pagan Reconstructionism, meaning that people try to figure out how our forefathers, our ancestors have practiced their religions based on historic finds, archaeological finds, cultural anthropology, and written documents from observers, which unfortunately most of the times were also intruders or missioners to that country. So we have to read with caution here. They try to reconstruct rituals, way of life, beliefs, festivities and so on. Of course, we will never get to the realistic, true core on how something was celebrated, first of all because it was probably very different from region to region, and secondly we're just lacking enough evidence. So what modern pagans do is usually work with the information they have, sometimes prescribing to one pantheon, sometimes prescribing to multiple pantheons, either worship gods, work with seasonal festivities, or do a modern interpretation of some practices. For example, let's take runes. Back in the days, runes were just a scriptive device, that's how you call it. Like, we use the alphabet now basically, and nowadays people use runes for divination purposes, which is a modern interpretation of an old instrument. So there are many flavors of modern day paganism out there. Hellenism, heathens, which is more the Germanic prescribed part of paganism. Discordianism, modern day Druidism. Wicca is also part of paganism as it derived from different old pagan beliefs and ideas. Celtic Reconstructionist paganism, the Roman polytheistic type of paganism, the Slavic native faith, and many more. A word on that when jumping into your research with paganism or joining online groups, be aware that there's a heavy right right-wing issue, racist issue in the pagan community, especially when you look into Germanic paganism and Norse paganism. A lot of people use it as an excuse to be absolute dickheads and just in general unpleasant beings without any true notion of history or factual knowledge. I mean, it all started with Hitler trying to bring back the old religion to Germany by using certain words, certain Germanic words, and of course also using the runes, the different type of inscriptions for their signs and for their propaganda. And yeah, some people are still clinging on to that idea and took it over the pond to spread their hate all over the world. But here we only do unicorns and sunshine and marshmallows. So what has paganism to do with witchcraft? In theory, not much, because a pagan practitioner might not practice witchcraft, they might just worship the gods, for example. However, since paganism also lives from folk practices that can be titled as witchcraft, some pagan practitioners also practice witchcraft. They might call it witchcraft, or they might just see it as part of their pagan path. And I mean, that definition is really up to everyone if they want to call themselves a witch or not. Let's see, did I forget anything? I don't think so. I hope that made it a little bit clearer for you. If you have any more questions, please let me know. And I'm gonna see you very soon with a wonderful magical vlog. Goodbye!